we're going to talk about some of the challenges that you're likely to encounter when receiving requests for new measurements. So when I say new measurements, I mean anything that hasn't been measured before, something that hasn't been reported on, or even representing data in a way that it hasn't been represented. So it's somewhat of a spectrum. And this presentation focuses on requests, but keep in mind that the same principles will apply if you are accessing data just for yourself, like a research project or just accessing data to help make a decision. So in just a moment, I'm going to give you some information on my background, and then we'll get into the nature of the new requests, how to approach them, navigating some of the common difficulties, and then what a long-term solution might look like. So I'm from East Lansing, about an hour and a half west of here. I live just south of there in Mason right now with my wife and 2 daughters. Sorry I don't have a picture. It's incredibly difficult to get all 4 of us in the same place at one time and get anything that looks anywhat near respectable. I went to Western Michigan University for undergrad, where I got 2 bachelors, one in fellow Bronco, all right, economics and comparative religion, and very different, but they gave me a good perspective for gathering both qualitative and quantitative data. From there, I spent time at a few small tech firms in the Lansing area, mostly sales, marketing data, a lot of web analytics, but small firms, you get exposure to a lot of data around the organization. Then I completed a Master's of Data Science from Indiana University in 2017. That brought me to Jackson, where I am now in the IT department. Started out with mostly executive reporting. That got me exposure to a wide variety of data around the IT department. And I'm now the product owner of the data science and artificial intelligence teams. I will be starting my MBA at Michigan State University this fall. So you can see throughout my career, I've had a lot of different data roles. But one of the things that has stayed common is that as soon as somebody finds out I do data, they come to me for everything data related. Especially if they don't know how to measure, something, they come to me and I help them out. So I got good at it. I got really good at it, and I even published a book last year on finding new ways to measure your disc golf games so that you can play better disc golf. Any disc golfers in here? A couple, okay. Hey, come find me afterward, we'll talk some disc golf. I got a couple copies of the book. So getting into the requests for new measurements. Let's talk about what they look like. Tell me, does this sound familiar to anyone? Where leadership is in an early planning meeting, they call you in and say, hey, can you help us find some new data sources to help us measure the success of this project over time? I see a few heads nodding. Consider yourselves lucky, because I don't think that has happened to me one time in my entire career. Not once. Usually, it's, hey, Chris, we just finished this project. Can you go find some data to tell us how successful we were? And obviously that's a little bit of a hyperbole, but it's not too far off from some of the requests that I've taken. So give me a quick show of hands here. How many of you are the analysts pulling the data and making the reports? Okay, about 2/3. And what about leaders? How many leaders do we have in the room who are requesting the reports? A few of you, okay. Okay, so requesters, I'm going to let you off the hook for just a moment here. See, unless you've been extensively trained in data, you probably are not looking at data as a product. Most people still see data as a pure service, and that's where a lot of these challenges come from. We need to get past that and start thinking of data as a product. Now, there's obviously some times where data as a service is a valid scenario, but even then, you probably have an infrastructure data product on the back end, and that's outside the scope of this presentation. So I think we all know that just about everyone is going through or has undergone a digital transformation. And this particular HBR article up here talks about one of the primary reasons that a lot of companies fail at their digital transformation is because when they go through the strategy and the planning, they still plan data as a service. They don't include data as a product in the larger initiative. So I'll let you do your own research on data as a product. We could talk for hours about that. But if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation, if you fall asleep after this, that's fine. Just remember that data is a product with a life cycle. And as we start thinking about that, and data workers, as we start embracing the consultant mindset and start training, start coaching our leaders and our customers, that's where we'll overcome a lot of these challenges that we'll get into. So why are we talking about this now? Why are these challenges becoming more frequent? Well, I just said it. Everyone is going through a digital transformation. That means there's more data available now than there ever was before. Tomorrow there'll be even more. And people are finally starting to understand and recognize the value of this data and embrace it. So it's simple economics. More demand, more supply, it's more requests, right? Now, I do want to be clear that it's not the requests that are the problem. Demand for data is good because that's what keeps us in business. It's the informal nature of the requests. It's when the requests are submitted as data as a service and the life cycle is not thought through. That's where the challenges come into play. So before we get into approaching these new measurements, I do want to make one very strong recommendation. If your organization has data governance and if it has a data intake process, follow that whenever you can. They're there for a reason. But let's be honest, it takes a level of maturity, and most organizations simply aren't there yet. We're making progress, but we're not there. So these are steps that you can take to avoid problem situations, either when there is no governance or intake processes available, or in the real world, sometimes the intake processes have to be circumvented. So these are things that you can keep in mind to avoid the problem situations. So first step is determine the value. If there's no value, don't do it. This should look familiar. I'm expecting to see a lot of blank faces saying, yeah, I do that anyway. It's good. You should be doing this for everything, not even just data requests. What is the value of everything? But I'm emphasizing it here because with new measurement requests, not only is it highly likely that somebody just said, we need this data, we need this measured, and hasn't really thought through the value, but there's also more uncertainty with these new measurement requests because we haven't had the time to vet out the use cases. We haven't been able to experiment with the data to prove that there's value. So you need to get in front of that. You need to explicitly dig in. I ask this all the time, what is the value? And it's amazing how often the response is, I think it will be interesting, or I think we can learn something from it. And I love that curiosity mindset. It's a great mindset to have, but that's probably not a wise use of business resources. We need to scope out what the data request is, scope out the value. So let's be transparent. Analysts are not cheap. So let's not pretend like they're free resources that we can just throw something at. So back in my web analytics days, I had somebody approach me and just say, hey, can you pull a report on our landing pages and the bounce rate? And I asked what the value is, and the response was, well, I think we can learn something from it. I think there will be something interesting in there. And that was the actual response. And sure enough, I found something very interesting. I found that every year, approximately 500,000 users were coming from old versions of our products and landing on a web page that highlighted the features of the new version of our product. That didn't resonate with them, so they bounced. They left the website. So I spent about a week, 2 weeks maybe, analyzing the data, preparing a proposal that showed if we were to spend about 3 weeks producing a new landing page, a new workflow, and we hit these users with targeted upgrade messaging, we could get about we could get tens to thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars every year if we just got a small portion of those 500,000 users to convert. So I submitted the proposal, and leadership said, yeah, that's interesting, we'll put it in the backlog. And it never got done. And I later found out that what they really wanted was a quick win. The value to them was finding something that could be turned around in 1 or 2 days just to decrease the bounce rate, like call to action, the change of messaging or color, change a title here or there. And what they wanted was fine, but had I gone through the process, dug into the value, I probably could have saved myself a week or two's worth of work. I think it will be interesting does not equal business value. Remember that. Curiosity is great, but in business resources, we need to make sure that we're using them responsibly. Number 2 is understand the customer's needs. Notice that needs are italicized. It's not what the customer thinks they want, it's what they need. Now, I'm looking around the room and I'm starting to see a couple of heads nodding. Yeah, you're already doing this anyway, right? You're a very intelligent group, and I love talking to you. You already get this. You understand. You should be doing this with everything. It doesn't matter. But again, I'm emphasizing it here because with new requests, people often just say, we need this data, I need this data, but they don't stop to think about who is going to be using it or what they're going to be using it for. So who is going to be using it, and is that the same person who's requesting it? That's an important one. How will the data be used, and most importantly, what decisions are going to be influenced with this data? I worked for a company once that employed a small inside sales team. There was no commission, and the emphasis was on customer service rather than predatory sales tactics. For the most part, this strategy worked. I liked it. One day, a sales associate came to me and said, hey, Chris, can you pull a report of all my sales stats and orders, show how I compare to the rest of the sales team members? I said, sure. It was around annual review time, so I assumed it was for improvement, something like that. I handed off the report, and 2 hours later, I received a phone call from HR saying, hey, Chris, can you confirm where this data came from? And my stomach dropped. It turned out the sales associate had been called into the manager's office for speaking to a customer in an inappropriate tone. The manager said to the sales associate, why don't we take the rest of the afternoon off, go think about it, cool down, we'll come back and talk tomorrow. The response was no. I'm too valuable. You need me here. See this data? That didn't go over well. It was a very awkward situation. Now, I had not necessarily done anything wrong. That data was available for anyone in the company who wanted it, and I just happened to have the SQL skills to aggregate it and rank it. But if I had pushed a little further, say, what do you need this data for, I could have potentially mitigated a very, very difficult situation. I learned the hard way, but that's why I'm here. Hopefully you don't have to learn the hard way. Listen to my stories. Researching the data. This one's important because it will drive the next step that I get to. You're all probably familiar with exploratory data analysis, distribution, nature of the data. This goes beyond that. This goes into the source of the data. What is the context and who's using it? What's the size of the data? And what are the frequency of refreshes? What's the cadence? I was working for one company who launched internal employee satisfaction survey. And my reporting team was called in at the last minute to analyze the data and report it. So we had to do a quick turnaround. We took an extract from the survey tool, dumped it into an Excel database, and I still cringe when I think about that Excel database, but we did what we had to do, quick turnaround. We visualized this in Tableau and then pushed it up to Tableau server. And it was 3-4 days. We were successful. But the next week, leadership got back to us and said, hey, there's an open comments field and the text is being cut off. So that was a pretty easy fix. It was just changing an access short text field to long text. Published it back up. The next day, leadership got back to us again and said, okay, we can see the comments, but people were literally typing 3 to 4 paragraphs in the comments field, and this expanded the row of every record. And leadership didn't want to have to scroll through 20, 30 pages of survey results. Okay, I get that. So we had to get creative here. We condensed the rows down to about normal size. Anywhere there was a comment, we put a little icon. If you hovered over the icon, it brought up a text box, and there was the comment. So we thought we were good here. A couple days later, leadership got back to us again, said this is closer, but hey, comments are still being chopped off. We can't see the full comments. And it turned out that Tableau desktop, when you have that pop-up box, it cuts off the characters after 3,000 characters. Shouldn't have needed 3,000, but it's the way it was. So we had no choice. Went back to the survey team and said, look, we need a hard limit put on these surveys. And they did. It worked. We published it up and it was fine. The problem there was once we took away the ability to write as much as you wanted, the associates felt as though something was being taken away. They felt as though management didn't want to hear everything they had to say. And whether that was true or not, they felt that way and it was a problem. So if we had been able to research the data in the first place, we probably could have figured out, hey, we need to make accommodations for this huge field, and we would have avoided the associates feeling like they were not being able to be heard. You all recognize this, right? Data lifecycle. You have to consider the data lifecycle, map out the steps. This one is critical, but it's one of the most overlooked steps. Really, most people just don't want to take the time. Most people want to request a quick report and don't want to take the time to go through the steps. But it's critical. Even if you only take 5 minutes, take 3 minutes to talk through the data lifecycle, that's all you need to avoid a lot of these problems. And I will tell you, it does not matter what model you use. There's many different data lifecycle models. This is one I've used a few times. Pick one that works for you and use it. Creating the data, it's a lot easier if the data is coming in the structured format, if it's coming through an API. But pay special attention to this if the new request, the new measurement request, requires you or somebody else to enter the data, especially if it's in Excel. That gets me to the next point, is storing. Hopefully you can avoid Excel. Ideally, we want some sort of a secure database. That's pretty standard. But even then, make sure that the people who need to access the data have the skills and tools required to access the database. If you end up getting stuck using Excel, I get it, sometimes that happens, make sure you're using things like data locks and data validations, because Excel is incredibly vulnerable. Use Python scripts to do ETL. Find someone to write a 10-minute script that'll do it so you can get away from that copy and paste stuff. That's terrible. And then sharing the data, it is not as simple as just sending an email with a link to the report. If you are using a tool to report, consider if your users, if your customers, how are they going to interact with the report? Do they have the technical skills to filter or interact with an interactive report? Do they need licenses or permissions to get to the report? Well, that doesn't apply to me. I'm just sharing PDFs of a report, right? No, think about this. What happens if someone takes that static PDF and in 9 to 12 months picks it up and tries to make a decision off of the data that you provided? That data is a year old now. What kind of problems will that cause? And that gets into archiving. Don't plan on leaving the data and the reports out forever. Make sure that you limit access to these old reports. But at the same time, make sure you have a record of your own reports. It's important to be able to go back and see what you've done. Just about every company that I've worked for has, in one way or another, tried to measure the quality and effectiveness of communication. That's notoriously difficult. We've always, one way or another, found some sort of proxy data points. And one effort that I was involved in, we used critical information sessions, I think is what they were called. It was an exchange of any sort of critical knowledge, like knowledge transfer or training, anything like that. And the team in charge of the effort gave us a large Excel document with one tab for each month, and then all the people holding the sessions were listed along the side, and they had to go enter their own data each month. And this data lifecycle was obviously not well thought out. Under the creation part, we found that people would enter characters that were not supported. They would put data where data didn't belong. They'd even put data over their own names and break our scripts. Then under the storing part, for some reason, people would go back 2-3 months and update data. They would put data in 2 to 3 months in advance when they hadn't had these sessions. That caused all sorts of problems with our scripts and our reporting. And then even the sharing, the tool that we used to share it, it turned out that about a quarter of the customers who needed to access the report didn't have a license to the tool that we were reporting in. And because we kept running into these problems month after month, about 4 or 5 months down the road, the project was scrapped. So if you don't plan out the life cycle, it gets back to the value. If you don't plan out the life cycle, business value will not be realized, and your project will probably be canceled. All right, navigating common difficulties. This is the fun part. The first thing is understand why it has not been measured before. There's always reasons why it has not been measured, and understanding those reasons will not only provide context into the actual measurement itself in your project, but it will give you insight into a lot of the technical and political challenges that you might run into. Now, there's a lot of common answers that are legitimate for this. Maybe the data didn't exist. Maybe we have a new business process or a new initiative. Okay, we would not have measured this data before. But there's a few things, a few red flags that if somebody answers this question with, you should really watch out for. It was too difficult to measure. Okay, well, what makes it less difficult now? Perhaps the data's been liberated. That's great. But it's also possible that they simply couldn't find anyone to dump the project on before. And I say that from experience. This has happened multiple times. It's not that it was too difficult. We've just found a patsy who will do it for us. It was not important before. This is another one. Maybe it did not align with any of our business initiatives. But what makes it important now? This is another one where it's very common that it's not actually important. It's just that somebody wants to get this data because it will make them look good, or they're receiving pressure from somewhere. So understand why it is important, get back to that value. Is it actually valuable? If it was not important before, what makes it important now? Managing expectations. This one is one of the most difficult ones that you're going to run into. See, if there's not data before, people are probably operating under a set of assumptions, and people don't like it when their assumptions are challenged. So first, figure out what people's assumptions are, and then figure out what's going to happen if my data challenges their assumptions. If that happens, if it challenges their assumptions, and I put my data up there, they're probably going to make more assumptions on it to make this data fit with their set of existing beliefs. So it's important to understand whose reputations and whose responsibilities are potentially going to be impacted if your data shows something unexpected. So the best thing you can do is just have a conversation. Talk with your customer, understand what they expect, and then tell them, make a plan for if the expectation is not met, if there's something unexpected. You can always try putting notes on your visuals, disclaimers, but if you've ever tried that before, people gloss over that really fast. Helps a little bit. And of course, you can try to structure your visualization in a way that it tells a story and leads the consumer to a conclusion, but that takes time and effort, and it's difficult. Back in my web marketing days early on, we had an e-commerce manager who set up an affiliate marketing program for our products. Within a couple of months, we had thousands of dollars flowing through this program, and it was deemed an early success. So the e-commerce manager comes to me and asks if I can come up with a report that shows why it was successful and if there's additional opportunities in there to expand it. So I pulled the data, and the data was not what we expected at all. Does anyone want to take a guess at what the top referring affiliate site was? Was that? No, we ran into that problem too, but that wasn't the top one. No, the top affiliate site was Retail Me Not, followed by coupons.com, followed by deals.com. And my analysis showed that people were hitting our web store, adding a product to the cart, leaving, returning within 5 minutes to purchase at a discount. But not only that, we were paying for that to happen. It was really bad. And I didn't want to damage the e-commerce manager's reputation, but I couldn't sit on this data. So I met with the e-commerce manager, and we talked for about a week, and it was a very, very uncomfortable week. The e-commerce manager was not happy and tried to argue it at first, but what was it Jan said? You can show them the data, but they won't always believe it. So we had to work through it for a long, uncomfortable week, and we finally came to the conclusion. I did some additional research and found that there were some legitimate affiliates that were sending us new traffic, that were getting us new sales. So we pulled in the reins on the coupon sites and pumped out the program toward the good affiliates. And we made it work. But it would have gone a lot smoother if I had sat down and said, hey, what happens if this data shows something unexpected? So always plan for that. And remember, the data doesn't lie, but people always make assumptions. Prototypes, proof of concepts, and MVPs. The new data, the new measurement requests, like I mentioned, we don't know what the value is frequently. So it's often the case that somebody asks you to create a manual prototype. Or sometimes it's just you have to because you have to get something done fast. They're great, they're a great tool. What we have to be careful of is that we don't get stuck in the mentality of if it works, use it. There's a lot of people who get caught in that mentality, and you might be on the hook maintaining this half-developed manual solution for a while. So some of the things you can do to get ahead of it are set an expiration date, an explicit expiration date on any proof of concepts or prototypes. Say, we're running this for 3 months. After this is done. I'm deleting it, getting rid of it. Again, communication, that's an important one. Communicate what the risks are. If we're running with a manual prototype or manual proof of concept, what happens, what are the risks of this breaking? What are the risks of bad data coming through? And then be explicit about your opportunity cost. If you want me to spend extra time supporting this half-developed solution, this is what will not get done. One reporting effort I was on, we had to gather data from around our organization and around the department and aggregate it and come up with a general health score for the department. I've been on quite a few projects like these, and most of them sadly end the same way. This one in particular had quite a few data points that were manual, that had never been measured before. So they had asked us to do a proof of concept, basically a manual prototype. Let's just get this done, see if we want to put development resources into it. So we gathered all the data. It took us about 2 months. It was a team of about 10 of us, full-time for 2 months, and we got it together. It was a lot of effort, but we did a great job, and management loved it. And they asked us to refresh the data. None of it was automated. It was all manually pulled together. And we didn't set any sort of expiration date on it. So it took us another month just to refresh the data. We even delivered that report a week late. This went on month after month with bad data coming through and a lot of effort put into reports that were being delivered late until they finally, we talked to them, and there was no desire, no appetite to put any sort of automation into the report, and they canceled it. And that was a lot of, that was many months worth of effort that I guess I got a good story out of it, right? But not much else came. Unanticipated update requests. It's basically what I just went through, right? These new measurements are often framed as one-time reports. Hey, I just want the data. Or if, in the case that I just showed, sometimes they are requested as POCs, but the POCs, manual prototypes, are often not. They're just a one-time POC. Don't care about updating. But the thing is, if you do your job well, people are going to ask you to do it again. If you make a great report with great data, that's going to generate organic demand, and you can pretty much count on somebody asking you to refresh the report. So plan on this happening. Some of the mitigation strategies are to explicitly ask. It doesn't always work. I think we know. We ask customer what they want, and they say, yeah, just a one-time report. Well, it turns out they actually want it frequently. As you're putting the report together, document what the requirements would be in order for you to refresh it again. If you want me to refresh it next month, I need this, 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 and this in place in the infrastructure. Talk to the people who use the data commonly and say, hey, who asks for this data and how often do they ask for it? Or how is this data used? And then, of course, do your industry research. If everyone else in the industry is using it, you can be darn sure that somebody is going to ask you to refresh this. It's not just a one-time thing. Everyone else is using it. We're going to also. Good data drives organic demand. Data owner reticence. I can promise you, if you work in data for a long time, you will end up running into people who own data and don't want to share it. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes they have a sense of ownership and don't want to give up their responsibilities. Other times they're concerned that you're going to misrepresent their data or somebody else is going to perceive it in the wrong way. But it's important. This is an important skill, and unfortunately, the short-term solution just comes down to how influential are you? Can you negotiate your way into that data? Longer-term solution is a data culture, which we'll get more into later. But in a data culture, you have more of a sense of stewardship, less of a sense of ownership. You have fewer fears of people misrepresenting and misinterpreting the data. One company I worked for had an idea for a report. They asked us to put together a report of the application that our users were using when an incident occurred and a ticket was submitted. This is different than the underlying system that's causing the issue. This is what system they're in. And the use case from this goes anywhere from helping with ticket routing to user experience, to messaging to the user if they're using an application and one of the backend systems goes down. So we pulled this report together, and the number one application was our internal corporate web portal. It's just your system that has all the launch links, and it has all of your general data and dashboards. And of course that was number one because that's the system everyone was using 75% of their day. And that also relied on the network, the internet, even hardware configurations. So if things got messed up, that's the application that would show a problem. Well, the owner of this corporate web portal had concerns, and rightfully so, that if we presented this data, everyone would start thinking that the corporate web portal was causing all these problems, which it wasn't. That's just where they experienced the problems. So we met with the owner and we had to negotiate for about 2 weeks. And it was a tough negotiation. We ended up working this one out where we agreed that before we shared the report with anyone, we would have a conversation with them to explain what they were seeing so that people wouldn't misinterpret. And of course, we put the warnings up at the top, but that only goes so far. But if you plan on people not being willing to share data, it's not always like that. Some people are more than willing, but if you plan on having some resistance to the data, it will be easier once you get down the road. So what do you do if the measurement is not possible? Because I think we all know that no is just not an acceptable answer. The first thing to remember is that everything can be measured in the long run. It's just a matter of how long and can we do it right now. So the first thing to do is list out the reasons why it can't be measured. And instead of saying why it can't be measured, focus on what would be necessary so that it can be measured. Positive instead of negative. These are the things that I need to happen or that need to be in place so that we can measure this efficiently. Of course, be explicit with your timeline. If we need to put resources into measuring it, this is how long it would take so that leadership can estimate and decide if it's worthwhile. And again, I've said this before, be explicit with the opportunity cost. If we're going to invest in measuring this, what are we going to put down on the side? What is not going to be done? You can always look for alternative measurements. That's proxy data points. Like I mentioned with the communications data. If you can't measure quality communication, what can you measure instead? Larry Prusak does a really good job of explaining what certain things can't be measured and explaining proxy data points to go along with them. Like human value. You can't measure human value or even reputation. It's an intangible thing. So find something that is either closely related and correlated or something that can be in place of that. But remember, if you are using proxy data points, make sure that it's correlated. I have some other stories that I'm not going to tell for the sake of time here, but I have a lot of stories of trying to use proxy data points that simply weren't correlated with the underlying concept that we wanted to get to. All right, moving into the long-term solution. Now, I will warn you that these are all long-term and a lot of effort, but they are very straightforward, simple to understand. Data governance and intake processes. That's pretty simple to understand, right? It's a huge undertaking, it's a huge effort, and usually it's part of a digital transformation. So if you are going through a digital transformation, do your due diligence, find out, make sure that somebody is incorporating data governance and specifically the data intake process. Good governance and intake processes will account for a lot of these challenges that you'll run into with these new measurement requests. And even if you have to start small, at a small analyst team, say, hey, we're not going to take requests from customers unless we have these requirements, unless you answer these questions for me. And that actually helps your customers too, think through what they're actually looking for. Data literacy, this one goes hand in hand with data governance. And analysts, data workers, this is where we come in, where we have to, as I mentioned before, embrace that consultant mindset. We have to start coaching our customers and our leaders on how to think of data as a product and not just a service. The data literacy, once you have a data culture, if people understand data and understand the nature of it, know how to request data, you are going to have fewer policy violations, fewer governance policy violations. And then think of the number of policies that are put in place because something goes wrong. With a data literate culture, you're less likely to have a huge monolith of a governance. You can have something maybe more adaptable, at least easier to understand. Now think of it like InfoSec. I think you'll all agree InfoSec operations, policies are absolutely critical, right? But also think about the amount of end user training we do. We spend a lot of time every year learning how to create strong passwords, how not to share sensitive information, how not to click on phishing scams in your email. That end user training supports the InfoSec policies. Same with data. Data literacy supports the data governance and the intake processes. Anyone from Michigan should know what this is, right? Deer crossing sign. Michigan Department of Transportation will tell you that one of the most important factors in deciding where to put these signs is the number of accidents that occur. Car on deer accidents. More accidents, higher likelihood the sign will be put up. But at the same time, the sign's not going to prevent all accidents. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to be smart about it. And at the same time, if you've been driving on Michigan roads for the last 20, 30 years, you probably know to look for deer even if that sign is not there. They're all over the place. Data literacy supports data governance. Remember that, hand in hand. They're both critical. Anticipate new measurement requests. That's a cop-out, right? Prevent the problem by knowing that's going to happen. This is really just a slide to encourage you to think ahead. If you're getting new measurement requests, think ahead what they're going to ask for. Think about what is going to be requested. You have domain expertise in your areas, so start thinking about what data you're using and who else is going to want to use it. Industry research, we covered that one, right? And then keep a log of your previous requests. If you notice that you're starting to get more requests in a certain area, then maybe you should start liberating that data. Maybe you should start preparing that data for use. Anticipate that it's coming. And finally, what we've been talking about this whole time is ask questions. Ask questions. What is the value? Who is the customer? What decisions will be influenced? And why has this not been measured? Not only does this help you prevent these problem situations, but the more that you start asking these questions, the more used to it your customers will become. As your customers start becoming used to it, it'll just become nature, and people will just naturally start thinking of data more as a product. And then when you introduce that idea to them, they'll say, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So thanks for joining. I hope you were able to take a few things out of it. Hopefully you could learn from my lessons so you don't run into all my horror stories. But we do have a few minutes left, so does anyone have any questions? All right, thank you.